Welcome to this Douglas Academy video for Broad General Education English. We're going to be having a series of lessons on a short story called Lamb to the Slaughter by Roald Dahl, and this will lead to the writing of a critical essay. These lessons are designed to support you with your study of a literature text. They're suitable for S1 to 3 pupils writing a critical essay. They cover a number of essential skills: listening to text, reading and analysing text, selecting quotations, and planning, structuring and writing a critical essay. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at Mary's alibi. In the last lesson, we discussed Mary killing her husband and whether we felt this was justified. In this lesson, we're going to look at what happens after the murder, as Mary prepares a cover story known as an alibi so that she won't take the blame for the murder. Let's listen to some more of the story and find out how Mary goes about covering up her role in the murder. It was extraordinary now how clear her mind became all of a sudden. She began thinking very fast. As the wife of a detective, she knew quite well what the penalty would be. That was fine. It made no difference to her. In fact, it would be a relief. On the other hand, what about the child? What were the laws about murderers with unborn children? Did they kill them both, mother and child? Or did they wait until the 10th month? What did they do? Mary Maloney didn't know, and she certainly wasn't prepared to take a chance. She carried the meat into the kitchen, placed it in a pan, turned the oven on high and shoved it inside. Then she washed her hands and ran upstairs to the bedroom. She sat down before the mirror, tidied her hair, touched up her lips and face. She tried a smile. Came out rather peculiar. She tried again. "Hello, Sam," she said brightly, aloud. The voice sounded peculiar too. "I want some potatoes, please, Sam. Yes, and I think a can of peas." That was better. Both the smile and the voice were coming out better now. She rehearsed it several times more. Then she ran downstairs, took her coat, went out the back door, down the garden and into the street. It wasn't 6 o'clock yet, and the lights were still on in the grocery shop. "Hello, Sam," she said brightly, smiling at the man behind the counter. "Why, good evening, Mrs. Maloney. How are you?" "I want some potatoes, please, Sam. Yes, and I think a can of peas." The man turned and reached up behind him on the shelf for the peas. "Patrick's decided he's tired and doesn't want to eat out tonight," she told him. "We usually go out Thursdays, you know, and now he's caught me without any vegetables in the house." "And how about meat, Mrs. Maloney?" "No, I've got meat, thanks. I got a nice leg of lamb from the freezer." "Oh, I don't know much about cooking it frozen, Sam, but I'm taking a chance on it this time. You think it will be all right?" "Personally," the grocer said, "I don't believe it makes any difference. You want these Idaho potatoes?" "Oh, yes, that will be fine. 2 of those." "Anything else?" The grocer cocked his head on one side, looking at her pleasantly. "How about afterwards? What are you going to give him for afterwards?" "Well, what would you suggest, Sam?" The man glanced around his shop. "How about a nice big slice of cheesecake? I know he likes that." "Perfect," she said. "He loves it." And when it was all wrapped and she'd paid, she put on her brightest smile and said, "Thank you, Sam. Good night." "Good night, Mrs. Maloney, and thank you." And now, she told herself as she hurried back, all she was doing now, she was returning home to her husband, and he was waiting for his supper. And she must cook it good and make it as tasty as possible, because the poor man was tired. And if, when she entered the house, she happened to find anything unusual or tragic or terrible, then naturally it would be a shock and she'd become frantic with grief and horror. Mind you, she wasn't expecting to find anything. She was just going home with the vegetables. Mrs. Patrick Maloney going home with the vegetables on Thursday evening to cook supper for her husband. That's the way, she told herself, Do everything right and natural. Keep things absolutely natural, and there will be no need for any acting at all. Therefore, when she entered the kitchen by the back door, she was humming a little tune to herself and smiling. "Patrick," she called. "How are you, darling?" She put the parcel down on the table and went through into the living room, and when she saw him lying there on the floor with his legs doubled up and one arm twisted back underneath his body, it really was rather a shock. All the old love and longing for him welled up inside her, and she ran over to him, knelt down beside him, and began to cry her heart out. It was easy. No acting was necessary. You might be wondering at this stage, why does Mary try to cover up the murder? Let's focus in on a key quotation from the text to find out why. As the wife of a detective, she knew quite well what the penalty would be. That was fine. It made no difference to her. In fact, it would be a relief. On the other hand, what about the child? What were the laws about murderers with unborn children? Did they kill them both, mother and child? Mary Maloney didn't know, and she certainly wasn't prepared to take a chance. If you want to press pause just now and have a go at the questions, please do so, and then you can press play again and hear our thoughts for going over them. Okay, let's have a look at our answers to the questions. What is Mary most worried about? You could say here that because she's 6 months pregnant, she's most worried about the consequences for her unborn child. Question 2 says, how do we know that she's not concerned about herself? Well, it says here, she knows as the wife of a detective what the penalty would be. We're talking about America in the 1950s here, where most of the states had the death penalty for murderers, and Mary would have known this. However, she says that was fine, it made no difference to her, in fact, it would be a relief. This suggests that she does feel that she deserves her punishment for what she's done, and also that she feels that her life is over without Patrick in it. This all feeds in into question 3. How do Mary's thoughts at this stage increase sympathy for her and keep the reader on the side of the murderer? I think Mary's shown here that she's not a selfish person, that she's only going to try and cover up the murder for the sake of her unborn child. We're going to look now at Mary's alibi and how she actually goes about covering up the crime and making sure that she has an alibi for where she is at the time the murder might have been committed. I've got a table here for you to fill in this task. You should complete this in your jotter. There's several things that Mary says or does, and you need to explain how this covers up the crime. The first one's been done for you. She smiles brightly at Sam, shows that she looks happy, as if nothing is out of the ordinary. She says Patrick is tired and doesn't want to go out. She mentions that they usually go out on Thursdays. She tells Sam she's taken some lamb out of the freezer. She seems worried about the risk of cooking the lamb from frozen. She asks Sam to suggest a pudding, and she tells Sam that Patrick loves cheesecake. Please complete this table in your jotter before you go on to the possible answers on the next slide. Okay, let's have a little look at some of the things that Mary says and does and how this might help to cover up the crime. We've done the first one already. We know that she smiles brightly to show that she's looking happy, as if nothing's out of the ordinary. She also says that Patrick is tired and doesn't want to go out. She's making sure that Sam knows that her husband is alone at home. If you think about this, this means that it could explain later why a possible burglar has entered her house and killed her husband while she's away. She mentions that they usually go out on Thursdays. Well, this explains why she's actually come to see Sam. This would be the reason why she actually has an alibi, because she needs food. So it's giving a plausible explanation for why she's out of the house while Patrick is in it. She tells Sam she's taken some lamb out of the freezer. This makes her look as if she's really only focused on making a nice dinner for her husband. However, we know ourselves that the lamb is actually the murder weapon. She seems worried about the risk of cooking the lamb from frozen. This is quite clever. She's sharing a small worry with somebody, and this actually makes her look as if she couldn't possibly have any bigger worries than worrying about whether a lamb's going to cook properly. She also asks Sam to suggest a pudding. It shows that she's caring about what Patrick will eat and presents herself as a loving wife. And also by telling Sam that Patrick loves cheesecake, it shows that she's thinking about her husband. She appears as a kind wife who wants to please her husband and would never hurt him. One aspect that's really interesting at this point is that Mary is unexpectedly really good at covering up the murder. If you think about all the things she does, she's actually behaving in a very clever way. Immediately after killing her husband, she puts the lamb in the oven, which starts the process of destroying the evidence. She plans an alibi straight away and understands that she needs to move quickly if she's going to cover it up. However, she does take time to put makeup on. This hides her emotions and shows herself as being much more put together when she goes outside the house. Before she goes, she rehearses carefully what she's going to say to Sam so that she sounds and looks really convincing. She also plays out the part of a loving wife perfectly in her visit to the grocer's. And it's interesting that by acting out the part, she almost convinces herself that her story is true. We're now going to do some work to find evidence from the text that proves that Mary is unexpectedly good at covering up the murder. Take some time now to pause this presentation and write this table out in your jotter to gather some evidence. Here are some possible quotations that you might have looked at, although there will be others that you can use as well. We know that she immediately puts the lamb in the oven because it says she carried the meat into the kitchen, turned the oven on high and shoved it inside. She plans an alibi straight away. Even when she's in the house, she's rehearsing it by saying, "Hello, Sam." She puts on makeup to hide her emotions. It says she touched up her lips and her face. She rehearses what she will say to Sam. It says in the text, she rehearsed it several times more. She plays out the part of loving wife perfectly in her visit to the grocer's, for example, saying, "Perfect," she said. "He loves it," about the choice of cheesecake. And by acting out the part, she almost convinces herself that the story is true. It says in the text, "It was easy, no acting necessary." So what have we learned in this lesson? Let's check your understanding. We've learned that Mary is unexpectedly good at covering up her husband's murder. She has qualities that a successful criminal might need to get away with murder: intelligence, the ability to control her emotions, and good acting skills. You might wish to consider at the moment whether you admire Mary for her cunning, or whether you think she should have confessed to her crime.